Everything felt heavy. My eyelids, my limbs, even my thoughts. It was as if I had been floating in darkness for an eternity and now something was pulling me back. A beeping sound filled the air, slow, steady, rhythmic. It wasn't unpleasant, but it felt intrusive, unnatural. I forced my eyes open, blinking against the harsh white light. The world came into focus in slow, disorienting pieces. White sheets. Pale blue walls. The faint scent of antiseptic. A hospital. Panic flickered in my chest. Why was I here? What happened? Before I could even process my own fear, a voice interrupted my thoughts. Oh, thank God, the man beside me exhaled, his voice trembling with what sounded like relief. You're awake. I turned my head slightly, my gaze landing on him. A tall man with dark brown hair and sharp hazel eyes, dressed in a well-fitted navy suit. He was handsome in the way that movie stars were, his features striking and refined, but there was something else beneath the surface. Something I couldn't name. He looked at me as if I meant the world to him. As if he had been waiting for this moment. How do you feel? He asked, leaning forward, concern etched into his face. I opened my mouth, but my throat felt dry. My voice came out hoarse. I don't know. My pulse quickened. I didn't know how I felt. But more than that, I didn't know who he was. I must have shown my confusion because the man's expression faltered slightly. Hey, it's okay, he said quickly. You've been through a lot. You were in an accident. An accident? I swallowed, my fingers twitching against the hospital blanket. My mind felt like a void. There was nothing. No flashes of memory, no recollection of what happened before I woke up. I tried to focus, to pull at something familiar, but it was like chasing smoke. Where? My voice was weak. Where am I? The hospital, he answered softly. I exhaled shakily. And who are you? His entire body stiffened. Just for a second. A quick, almost imperceptible reaction, but I caught it. Then just as quickly he forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm James, he said, reaching for my hand. His fingers were warm, firm, as if he were trying to ground me. I'm your husband. My stomach twisted. Husband. The word felt foreign on my tongue, like a language I didn't understand. I should have felt something. Recognition. Familiarity. Anything. But as I looked at him, this man who was supposedly my husband, I felt nothing. My breathing turned uneven. I don't remember. His smile faltered again, just a flicker of something unreadable in his hazel eyes before he smoothed it away. It's okay, he said gently. The doctor said this might happen. Memory loss is common after trauma. Memory loss. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't even know my own name. I looked down at my hands, pale against the hospital sheets. My fingers trembled slightly as I tried to grasp who I was. How long? I forced the words out, my throat aching. How long have we been married? James hesitated. Just for a second. 3 years, he said, his tone careful. We've been together for 5. I swallowed, my mind blank. 5 years. 3 years of marriage. I had no memories of this man, no images of the life we supposedly shared. Shouldn't I have felt something? A flicker of recognition? A sense of belonging? But there was nothing. Just a void. James must have noticed my panic because he squeezed my hand reassuringly. You'll remember soon. I'll help you, okay? I nodded slowly, even though every part of me was screaming that something was wrong. There was something in his eyes. Something that didn't match his reassuring words. And even though I couldn't remember why, I knew I didn't trust him. Going home should have been comforting. It should have felt like stepping into familiarity, into a place that my heart recognized even if my mind didn't. But as I stood in front of the grand 2-story house with pristine white walls, a dark mahogany door and a perfectly manicured lawn, I felt nothing. James led me inside, his hand resting gently on the small of my back, guiding me through the threshold. The scent of lavender and polished wood filled the air, and everything inside was immaculate. There were no signs of a life interrupted, no scattered clothes, no unfinished books on the coffee table, no half-drunk cups of coffee left behind in a rush. It was too perfect. This is home, James said softly, watching me carefully. Home. I looked around, my gaze sweeping over the pristine cream-colored couch, the glass coffee table, the elegant chandelier hanging above the modern dining set. A painting of a city skyline decorated the far wall, but it felt like something out of a showroom. Expensive, impressive but cold. I swallowed hard. It's beautiful. James smiled, his expression softening. You always loved decorating. Every piece in this house was picked by you, was it? I stared at the furniture, the polished floors, the spotless counters. I tried to imagine myself choosing these things, placing each piece with care, creating a home in this space. But there was nothing. No flicker of recognition. No warmth. Just an emptiness inside me, like I was standing in a stranger's house, an intruder in someone else's life. James must have noticed my hesitation because he took my hand, squeezing it gently. It'll take time, but it's all here. Everything about our life. I kept things exactly as they were, waiting for you to come back. There was something too smooth about his words, too rehearsed. I forced a smile. Thank you. He led me to what was supposed to be our bedroom. The walls were a soft beige, the king-sized bed covered in elegant white linens, the furniture sleek and modern. But it felt sterile, as if no one actually lived here. James walked to a large wooden dresser, opening the top drawer. Inside, neatly folded clothes rested in perfect rows. Silk blouses, designer sweaters, delicate lace lingerie. Everything was arranged like it had never been touched. I organized all your things, he said. It should all feel familiar soon. I ran my fingers over the fabric, trying to force a connection, trying to feel like this was mine. Nothing. Here, James said suddenly, reaching into the back of the drawer. He pulled out a delicate silver necklace with a sapphire pendant. You never took this off, he murmured, stepping behind me. His fingers brushed my neck as he fastened the chain around me, his touch lingering. A chill ran down my spine. I should have felt comforted. I should have felt something. But instead I felt trapped. After James left me to rest, I wandered the house. Everywhere I turned there were photos of us. On the walls. The bookshelves. The bedside table. In the pictures we looked happy. One photo showed us at the beach, his arms wrapped tightly around my waist. Another captured us in a dimly lit restaurant, laughing over wine. There was even a wedding picture. Me in a flowing white gown, him in a tailored suit, both of us smiling like we had the perfect life. I should have felt warmth, nostalgia, love. Instead, I felt like I was staring at someone else's memories. Because I didn't remember any of it. And the more I looked at these pictures, the more something felt off. Every frame, every moment captured was perfect. Too perfect. As if someone had carefully curated them, handpicking only the best moments to put on display. I picked up a framed picture of us at a Christmas party, my white hair cascading over my shoulder as James kissed my cheek. And then I noticed it. The background. A Christmas tree fully decorated. Fairy lights twinkling. A table set with champagne glasses. But no people. No family. No friends. Only us. Where were the other moments? Where were the casual pictures? The unposed ones? The goofy candids? The ones that weren't carefully staged? A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Something wasn't right. The next morning the doorbell rang. James had left early for work, and for the first time I was alone in the house. I hesitated before opening the door, uncertainty filling me. Then I saw her. A woman with wavy auburn hair and green eyes stood on the porch, gripping a coffee cup in one hand, her expression unreadable. Emily. The name bloomed in my mind before she even spoke, before she even said, "Oh my God. You're really here." She pulled me into a tight hug, and for the first time I felt something. Something real. A warmth, a connection. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Emily." She laughed, a little choked. "Yeah, it's me." She pulled back, searching my face. "You really don't remember anything?" I shook my head and something flashed in her eyes. A sadness. A hesitation. Then she glanced over my shoulder into the house, and I swore her expression darkened. "So, James told you everything?" she asked carefully. I nodded. "He said we've been married for 3 years. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. "Right. 3 years. A cold prickle crawled up my spine. Something in her tone sounded wrong. She stepped inside, looking around like she was seeing the house for the first time. Or maybe, like she was seeing it again after a long time away. I frowned. "You've been here before, right?" She turned back to me, her green eyes hesitant. "Yeah," she said softly. "A long time ago." And something in her voice made my stomach twist. As if there was a part of the story I hadn't been told. And then I heard it. The buzzing sound of a phone. A phone that wasn't mine. I followed the noise to the kitchen drawer, my fingers trembling as I pulled it open. And there was a second phone. A phone James had never mentioned. The screen lit up with an unread message. From an unknown number. Does she know about us? My breath hitched. The room tilted. I gripped the counter, my heart pounding in my chest. Emily stepped closer, looking over my shoulder. She read the message, then inhaled sharply. Looks like you just found your first clue. And I knew in that moment. My husband was lying to me. The second phone burned in my hands like a piece of forbidden truth. A reality I wasn't supposed to uncover. My fingers trembled as I gripped it tighter, my mind racing. Does she know about us? The words on the screen felt like a knife slicing through the fragile illusion James had built around me. Emily was silent beside me, watching as I tried to process it. I turned to her, my voice unsteady. What does this mean? She hesitated, like she was weighing her words carefully. Then she exhaled. I don't know. But I do know one thing. James never mentioned that phone, which means he's hiding something. I swallowed hard, staring at the text again. Every part of me screamed that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a secret. A big one. I shoved the phone back into the drawer before my hands could betray me and shook my head. I need to ask him. Emily's expression darkened. No. Not yet. I frowned. Why not? She crossed her arms. Because if he's lying, and I mean really lying, then confronting him before we know the truth gives him time to cover his tracks. We need to find out more first. I hated the logic in her words. Every part of me wanted to demand answers now, to force James to tell me what was going on. But a deeper instinct, something raw and unexplainable, held me back. So I nodded. Hey, what do we do? Emily pulled out her own phone. We start digging. That night I kept the second phone hidden. I acted normal. I forced myself to play the part of the woman James expected me to be. The doting wife, the confused but trusting spouse, the woman who accepted every missing piece of her life without question. But my mind was sharp, awake, watching. And the more I paid attention, the more things didn't add up. James was too perfect, too patient, too rehearsed in his answers. Whenever I asked him about our past, he always redirected the conversation. Whenever I mentioned Emily, his jaw tightened. Whenever I said I didn't remember something, he would tell me instead of helping me remember. But the biggest clue came when he left for work. Because when I went looking for our wedding album, the most obvious piece of proof of our love, it was missing. James wasn't just lying to me. He was hiding an entire part of our life. And I was about to find out why. I knew something was wrong. Deeply, irreversibly wrong. James had built a perfectly curated version of our life. A story that felt polished yet soulless. The missing wedding album, the hidden phone, the way he expertly dodged questions. It all pointed to something deliberate. But I needed proof. Emily and I sat in my bedroom, the second phone between us, its screen casting an eerie glow in the dimly lit room. She leaned closer, scrolling through the messages. They go back for months, she murmured. Whoever this is, she's not just some random fling. My throat tightened. Months. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a single moment of weakness. James had been living a double life. And I was the one left in the dark. I inhaled sharply. We need to find her. Emily glanced at me, green eyes filled with something close to pride. That's the spirit. Tracking down the number wasn't easy, but Emily had connections. Within a few hours we had a name. Lisa Carter. A boutique owner. Mid-30s. Lived downtown. And, according to her public social media, she had no idea I existed. Her photos were casual, filled with warm smiles and candid shots of her in a beautifully decorated apartment. And then there were the ones with James, laughing over wine, standing beside her at fancy events, kissing her forehead like she was his world. My stomach twisted. How could this be possible? How could he live two separate lives? One with her, one with me, and never slip? Emily's jaw clenched as she scrolled further. He's been with her while you were in the hospital. The air left my lungs. He wasn't waiting for me. He was replacing me. I gritted my teeth, my fingers curling into fists. I need to talk to her. Emily nodded. Then let's go. Lisa's boutique was charming, elegant but not extravagant, filled with handmade jewelry and delicate fabric pieces. She was in the middle of arranging a new display when the bell above the door chimed, signaling our entrance. She turned, her dark hair falling over her shoulder, her light brown eyes meeting mine. The second she saw me, she froze. A pure, unfiltered shock flashed across her face. I stepped closer, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "You know who I am." Lisa swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the silk scarf in her hands. She shook her head. "This isn't possible." Emily crossed her arms. "Oh, it's very possible." Lisa looked between us, panic rising in her expression. "James said." She stopped herself. I took another step. "What did James say?" Her lips parted and then she whispered something that made my entire world collapse. "He told me that you left him a year ago." The room spun. "A year?" My voice barely came out. "A year." Lisa nodded slowly. "He said you walked out. That you wanted nothing to do with him." My hands trembled. My mind reeled. James hadn't just lied. He had erased me. He had rewritten the entire timeline of my existence. Emily was the first to speak, her voice low, dangerous. "Well, isn't that interesting?" Because she was in a hospital. In a coma. For 6 months. Lisa's eyes widened in horror. No, that's not, he wouldn't." But I saw it in her face. He knew. Maybe not all of it, but enough to understand that she, too, had been living inside one of James' carefully constructed lies. I exhaled shakily. "You didn't know, did you?" Lisa slowly shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea." And in that moment I knew, Lisa wasn't my enemy. She was another victim. And together we were about to take James down. Lisa's boutique felt suffocating. The walls, once adorned with delicate jewelry and carefully arranged fabrics, now felt like they were closing in around me. My pulse thundered in my ears, my body frozen as Lisa processed the truth. She shook her head as if trying to make sense of everything. "No, this isn't possible. He told me you were gone." I exhaled sharply, steadying myself. My voice wavered. "In a hospital bed. For 6 months." Lisa's breath caught. She took a shaky step back, her brown eyes clouded with disbelief. "He said you left him." My fists clenched. He lied. The weight of the realization hit her then. I saw it in the way her shoulders dropped, the way her face paled, the way her fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of a nearby display table for support. She had believed in him. Just like I had. Emily stepped in, arms crossed, voice edged with quiet fury. "Did you ever question why he never let you meet any of his friends? Why you never saw his family? Why he always kept parts of his life private?" Lisa's lips parted, but she said nothing. But she had. She had asked those questions, but like me, she had let James explain them away. I let out a slow breath, willing myself to stay calm. "Lisa, I don't want to hurt you. I don't even blame you. But I need answers." She swallowed hard. "What do you want to know?" We sat at a small cafe a few blocks from her boutique, the atmosphere thick with unease. Lisa sipped at her tea, her hands still shaking. I barely touched mine, my stomach twisted into knots. "He never told me much about his past," Lisa admitted. "But now, I see why." She let out a bitter laugh. "Because he was still living a double life." I nodded, my fingers tightening around the edge of my seat. "When did you meet him?" Lisa hesitated, then looked down at her cup. "A little over a year ago. He was charming, smooth, he swept me off my feet. At first I thought he was perfect. But then things got strange." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Strange how?" Lisa played with the rim of her cup, her expression troubled. "He was always traveling for business. At first I thought nothing of it. But then I started noticing little things. He never let me visit his place, he always had an excuse for why I couldn't meet his coworkers. And the biggest red flag." She looked up at me then, her voice full of something between regret and rage. "He never let me take pictures of us. He said he was private, but now I see it was just to hide the fact that he was living 2 separate lives." I exhaled shakily. The pieces were falling into place. Lisa had met James while I was still with him. While I was living under the illusion of a happy marriage, while I was fighting to remember the life I lost, he was already replacing me. Emily leaned forward, eyes dark. "Lisa, do you still have any messages from him?" Lisa nodded, pulling out her phone. "Yeah. And now that I know the truth, maybe there's something in here that can help us." Lisa scrolled through her messages, her expression tightening. "Here," she said, turning the screen toward us. A text from James sent 2 weeks ago. I miss you. I can't wait to be with you again. Soon everything will be the way it's supposed to be. Emily let out a sharp breath. So even after you came back from the hospital, he was still seeing her? I swallowed, my hands clenching into fists. Looks like it. Lisa scrolled further, her brows furrowing. Wait. This doesn't make sense. My heart pounded. What doesn't? She turned the phone back toward herself, clicking into an older message. Then slowly she met my gaze. This message, she whispered. He sent it the day before your accident. The air left my lungs. Emily stiffened. What did it say? Lisa read it aloud, her voice barely above a breath. She'll be gone soon. We can finally start over. Silence fell over the table. The cafe around us continued as normal. People chatting, spoons clinking against ceramic mugs, the hum of conversation floating in the air. But for me, time stopped. I felt cold. Numb. Like my entire body had just been submerged in ice. Gone soon. James hadn't just been cheating. He had been planning my disappearance. Emily was the first to react. She shot up from her seat, nearly knocking over her coffee. Oh hell no. This is more than just an affair. This is a setup, I whispered, my voice hollow. Lisa covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with horror. No, she murmured. No, he couldn't. But he could. And he did. James hadn't just lied to me. He had tried to erase me. It wasn't a coincidence. James had been waiting for me to disappear. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the cafe table, my blue eyes fixed on the words glowing from Lisa's phone. She'll be gone soon. We can finally start over. It didn't feel real. For weeks I had been trying to remember who I was. Trying to piece together a life I didn't recognize. But now I wasn't just uncovering forgotten memories. I was uncovering a plan. A plan to get rid of me. Lisa looked sick, her fingers hovering over her phone like she wanted to erase the message. Like deleting it would make it all not true. Maybe he didn't mean it like that, she whispered, but the words rang hollow. Emily scoffed, crossing her arms. Lisa, come on. You don't still believe him, do you? Lisa swallowed hard, shaking her head. No. I don't want to believe that I was part of something this twisted. I inhaled slowly, willing myself to stay calm. You didn't know. She let out a shaky laugh, eyes glassy. That doesn't change the fact that I was still the other woman. That I was part of his plan to replace you. I glanced at Emily, my stomach twisting. We need to get proof. More than just this text. Emily nodded. We need to know exactly what he meant by it's gone. Because if we're right, if he actually did something to cause your accident. She didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lisa's voice was quiet. What do we do? I exhaled. We set a trap. That night I went home to James. I forced myself to act normal. To let him believe that I was still the lost, helpless woman who trusted him. He was waiting in the kitchen when I walked in, a glass of red wine in his hand, his hazel eyes lighting up the moment he saw me. Hey sweetheart. How was your day? I swallowed down the bile rising in my throat. How was my day? I found out that my husband wasn't just cheating on me, he was waiting for me to disappear. But I smiled. Like I didn't know. It was good, I said softly, setting my purse down. Emily took me around the city. I think some places are starting to feel familiar. He grinned, stepping closer, pressing a kiss to my forehead. That's great, baby. I knew your memory would come back soon. I held my breath as he touched me. His fingers slid along my wrist, warm, gentle. The same hands that had held another woman. The same hands that had typed out that text. I forced myself to stay still. Actually, I said, pulling back slightly, I found something today. James tilted his head. Oh. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a photograph. Lisa had found it tucked inside one of her books. It was a picture of James and me, taken just a few days before my accident. James stiffened the moment he saw it. His eyes flickered just for a second. If I hadn't been watching for it, I would have missed it. Where did you find that? He asked too casually. I don't know, I lied. It was in one of my drawers. I thought you might remember where it was taken. James hesitated. Then he smiled. Of course. That was from our trip to the lake house. Just before you. He stopped himself. I swallowed hard. Just before what? His smile didn't falter, but I saw the shift in his posture. The way his fingers tensed slightly. the way his hazel eyes darkened. You know, he said smoothly. The accident. The lake house. The place I had never heard him mention before. I forced myself to nod, to act like it made sense. Right. The accident. James reached for me again, brushing my white hair behind my ear, his voice gentle. You don't need to force yourself to remember, baby. Just trust me, okay? I'll tell you everything you need to know. Everything I need to know. But only what he wanted me to know. I smiled softly, letting him think he was still in control. I trust you. Because I needed one more thing. The address. The next morning while James was in the shower, I took his phone. I memorized the address to the lake house and sent it to Emily. Then I deleted the message and placed his phone back on the nightstand exactly where I found it. When he came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around his waist, I was sitting in bed pretending to read a book. He smiled at me, his usual charming, effortless smile. Morning, gorgeous. I smiled back. Morning. And the whole time my heart was pounding. Because I had just stolen the one clue that might finally tell me what really happened to me. That afternoon I drove to the lake house with Emily. The drive was long, the roads winding through empty stretches of forest and open fields. Secluded. Quiet. The kind of place you could disappear and no one would find you. My stomach twisted. When we finally pulled up to the house, a beautiful remote cabin overlooking the water, I felt a rush of déjà vu. Like I had been here before. Like I had lost something here. Emily parked, cutting the engine. You okay? I exhaled. I don't know. We stepped out, the cool breeze brushing against my skin. The front door was locked, but Emily was already pulling out a set of bobby pins. Give me 2 minutes. I didn't ask how she knew how to pick a lock. The door clicked open and we stepped inside. It was perfectly clean. Too clean. Like someone had scrubbed away any trace of what happened here. And then I saw it. The small crack on the wooden floor near the fireplace. The moment I did, my head ached. A flash of something. A memory. Me. Falling. Pain. Darkness. I stumbled back, my breath hitching. Emily caught me. What? What is it? I pointed at the floor, my hands trembling. I fell here. She swallowed hard. Or you were pushed. I couldn't breathe. Because she was right. This wasn't just a place I had been before. This was where it happened. The accident that stole my memories. The place where James tried to get rid of me. No. I was finally remembering. Leaving James was supposed to be the hardest part. For weeks I had played the role of the devoted wife, hiding what I had learned, pretending I was still lost in the fog of amnesia. But the moment I found proof, the texts, the hidden life, the lie that he had been waiting for me to disappear, everything changed. The truth wasn't just painful. It was dangerous. And if James thought I was going to stay quiet, he was wrong. I stood in Emily's apartment, my suitcase half-packed, my hands trembling as I folded another sweater. Emily watched me carefully from the doorway. You sure you don't want to just stay here permanently? I let out a shaky breath. I need to go back one last time. I need to get the rest of my things. And I swallowed hard. I need him to see me walk out. Emily's expression darkened. I don't like this. Neither did I. But something inside me refused to leave quietly. James had stolen so much from me. My memories, my trust, my sense of safety. If I left without facing him, without taking back my own story, it would feel like he had won. And I wasn't about to let that happen. Emily sighed. Fine. But I'm coming with you. I looked up, surprised. You don't have to. She raised a hand. Nope. Not a chance. You think I'm letting you walk into that house alone? Gratitude swelled in my chest. Thank you. She gave me a small smirk. Just don't expect me to be polite. I let out a weak laugh. I wouldn't dream of it. The drive back to my home, the house that James had carefully designed to trap me in a life that wasn't real, felt surreal. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. Emily sat beside me, her green eyes scanning the road, always alert. When I finally pulled up in the driveway, my stomach twisted. Nothing had changed. The curtains were still drawn neatly. The lawn was perfectly manicured. Everything looked too normal. As if my absence hadn't mattered. Emily glanced at me. You ready for this? I nodded, even though I wasn't sure. But I had no choice. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, my heart pounding with every step. Then just as I reached for the handle, it swung open. And there he was. James. Dressed in a crisp button-up shirt, his dark brown hair perfectly styled, his hazel eyes locking onto me the second I stepped forward. For a moment we just stared at each other. Then he smiled. Like he had been expecting me. "Well," James said smoothly, leaning against the door frame. "You finally came back." I inhaled sharply. "Not for you." His eyes flickered to Emily standing behind me, and I saw the moment his charming facade cracked. His smile faltered. "You brought backup?" Emily crossed her arms. "Did you expect anything less?" James let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "You always did like getting involved in things that weren't your business, Emily." She smirked. "And you always did like cheating on your wife. Guess we all have our flaws." His jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw the real James. The one beneath the smooth words and careful lies. Cold, calculating. A man who hated losing control. I lifted my chin. "I'm here to get my things." James tilted his head, studying me. "That's all." "That's all." A beat of silence. Then he stepped aside, gesturing inside. "Be my guest." Emily grabbed my wrist, whispering under her breath. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded. "I have to do this." She exhaled but followed me inside. As I walked through the house, I realized how empty it felt. The furniture, the decor, the carefully placed photos. None of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. Because it didn't. It had never been my home. It had been James' stage. A perfectly designed world where he could mold me into the perfect wife, where he could erase the parts of me that didn't fit into his narrative. And I had spent too long playing my role. Not anymore. I packed only what mattered. Clothes, personal documents, the few sentimental items that actually felt like mine. James leaned against the doorway as I zipped up my suitcase. "You really think you're going to find something better than this?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "I already have." His expression darkened. "You're making a mistake." I stood up, gripping my suitcase handle tightly. "No. The only mistake I ever made was trusting you." For the first time, James had nothing to say. He just watched, silent, as I walked past him. As I stepped out of that house, his house, for the last time. As I chose myself over him. Emily held the car door open for me, giving me a small nod. "Proud of you." I exhaled, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. "Thanks." And as we drove away, I didn't look back. Emily had offered to let me stay with her indefinitely, but something inside me told me I needed to do this on my own. So I rented a small apartment. Nothing fancy, just a quiet, sunlit space on the edge of the city. A place that actually felt mine. The first night, I sat in the middle of the living room, surrounded by unpacked boxes, staring at the blank walls. No framed photos of a fake life. No signs of James. Just emptiness. And for a moment it hit me. What now? I had spent so long unraveling James' lies, uncovering the truth, fighting to break free from him. But now that I didn't know who I was outside of survival. I pulled my knees to my chest, taking a deep breath. It's okay. For the first time in a long time, I had time. To heal. To rebuild. To figure out what I actually wanted. Starting over wasn't about huge, dramatic changes. It was about the little moments that made me feel like myself again. Morning coffee on my tiny balcony, watching the city come to life. Reading books for myself, not pretending to enjoy the ones James picked. Blasting music in my apartment, dancing barefoot in the kitchen just because I could. Calling Emily and hearing her say, "You sound happy." For so long I had been trapped in James' world. But now, I was learning what it meant to live for me. James had always made me believe that I needed him. That without him I was nothing. But as I built this new life, one where I didn't have to look over my shoulder, where I didn't have to play the role of the perfect wife, I realized something. I was never weak. James hadn't broken me. He had only delayed me from becoming who I was always meant to be. And as I stood in my little apartment sipping coffee, the morning sunlight warming my skin, I finally understood. Leaving him wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. James had taken so much from me, not just my past but my ability to believe in love without fear. And then I met Daniel. It happened on a rainy afternoon. I had taken shelter in a small bookstore, the scent of old paper and freshly brewed coffee wrapping around me like a familiar embrace. I was reaching for a book on the top shelf when I heard a voice behind me. "Need some help?" I turned and met a pair of calm, steady blue eyes. The man standing there was tall, with dark blonde hair that was slightly damp from the rain. He had a quiet, effortless confidence about him, not overbearing, not forceful. Just present. I hesitated. I think I've got it. He smirked. Because climbing the shelf is totally an option? I let out a breathy laugh. An actual laugh. The first real one in weeks. "'Kay, fine," I admitted. "Maybe I could use a little help." He easily pulled the book from the shelf and handed it to me. "There. Crisis averted." I took it, feeling something strange settle in my chest. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Warmth. We ended up in the bookstore cafe talking over coffee. His name was Daniel. He was an architect, loved books, and had a dog named Max who, according to him, had more personality than most people. But the thing that struck me the most? He didn't pry. He didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. He just talked to me. Like I was a person, not a broken thing. Like I was someone worth knowing, even without the tragedy attached to my name. At one point, Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching me with that same easy confidence. "So what's your story?" I stiffened, instinctively expecting to feel the usual wave of panic. But it never came. Because I didn't have to tell him everything. I didn't owe him my past. I could just be who I was in that moment. I smiled, stirring my coffee. "It's complicated." Daniel grinned. "I like complicated." I bit my lip, feeling something flicker inside me. Something dangerous. Something hopeful. "Then maybe," I said slowly, "you like me." His smile widened. "I think I already do." Meeting Daniel wasn't like some dramatic, earth-shattering moment. It was simple. Effortless. Easy. And after everything I had been through, I realized that was exactly what love was supposed to feel like. Falling for Daniel should have scared me. I had spent so much time relearning how to live without James, so much time convincing myself that love was just a carefully constructed lie. Something people used to manipulate, to control, to trap. But Daniel never made me feel trapped. He made me feel free. I wasn't ready for anything serious. I told him that one evening when we sat in a quiet park, the sun setting behind us. The air was crisp, the world tinged in gold, and yet my heart wasn't sure if it was ready. Daniel didn't get offended. He didn't push. He just nodded, his blue eyes steady. "Okay." I frowned. "Okay." He smiled. "Yeah. We take it at your pace. No pressure." It was such a simple response, but it made my throat tighten. Because no one had ever given me a choice before. At first, I only let him in through small moments. A cup of coffee in the morning. A casual text message at the end of the day. A slow walk through the bookstore where we first met, his presence beside me, feeling safe. Trusting again wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the little things. And Daniel? He never asked for anything more than what I was willing to give. It was late and a thunderstorm had rolled in. Rain pattered against my apartment windows as I curled up on the couch, an old movie playing softly in the background. Then my phone buzzed. "Daniel, you okay?" Saw the storm coming in. I stared at the message for a long moment. It was such a simple thing. No demands. No expectations. Just a reminder that someone cared. And for the first time in forever, I texted back without hesitation. "Me, yeah. But I wouldn't mind some company." 15 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, slightly drenched from the rain, holding a takeaway bag in one hand and a soft hoodie in the other. "Figured you might want food," he said. "And something comfortable to wear." I laughed, shaking my head. "Are you always this thoughtful?" He grinned. "No. Just when I really like someone." My heart stumbled. I let him in. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was making a mistake. I knew James wouldn't let go easily. And I was right. One afternoon as I walked out of my apartment building, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number. We need to talk." I knew exactly who it was. A chill crawled down my spine, but I didn't hesitate. I had already made up my mind. "Me, there's nothing left to say." Seconds later, another message appeared. "Unknown number. You think you can just erase me?" I let out a slow breath, gripping my phone tightly. For a long time I had let James control me through fear. But fear wasn't enough anymore. I had erased him from my life. Now he had to learn how to live with that. I blocked the number. And just like that, I chose myself over him. That night I met Daniel for dinner. It wasn't a big moment. There were no dramatic confessions, no grand gestures. Just us, sitting across from each other in a quiet restaurant, the candlelight flickering between us. I watched him as he talked, his blue eyes warm and full of something that had always been missing from my past. Honesty. Patience. Something real. And I knew. This was it. I reached across the table, threading my fingers through his. Daniel looked surprised, then smiled, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. This is new. I laughed softly. I guess I'm done being scared. His grip tightened slightly. Good. And in that moment I knew. I wasn't just choosing love. I was choosing happiness. I was choosing me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in someone else's version of love. I wasn't trapped in a marriage filled with manipulation and lies. I wasn't waiting for permission to be happy. I was free. And this time I was building a future on my own terms. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. Daniel and I sat on my apartment balcony, sipping coffee, watching the city wake up beneath us. The warmth of the sunlight bathed us in golden light, and for the first time in a long time my heart felt light. Daniel glanced at me, his blue eyes thoughtful. You seem different. I smiled, tilting my head. How so? He leaned back in his chair, studying me. Lighter. Like you're finally breathing again. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp morning air fill my lungs. I think I am. For so long I had been surviving. Fighting to escape James, to reclaim my life, to break free from everything that had held me down. But now I was living. And Daniel wasn't my rescuer. He wasn't the person who saved me. I saved myself. He was just the person who reminded me what love was supposed to feel like. Safe, steady, real. There was no dramatic ending to my story with James. No last confrontation. No final apology that would fix everything. Because I didn't need it. I didn't need closure from him. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. All I needed was this moment. This life that I had built. One that belonged to me and me alone. One evening, Daniel and I walked hand in hand down the busy streets of the city. The lights twinkled around us, the world buzzing with life, and I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't waiting for something bad to happen. Because for the first time, my future wasn't something I feared. It was something I was excited for. Daniel squeezed my hand, giving me a small smile. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I thought about it for a second, then smiled back. Happy. His expression softened. Yeah, I said, and for the first time, I actually believed it. It ended with healing. With a life I chose. With love that was real. And for the first time I knew. This was exactly where I was meant to be.